Hello everyone. So we are discussing the first lesson of industrial law today, and the first lesson of industrial law is contract of service and test to identify a workman. So what is a contract of service? Now again, I mean, as in like in this lesson, we are going to be discussing about two types of employment contracts, and the first one is a contract of service. Now, what is a contract of service? Like a contract of service is an agreement or an instrument where it defines the employer-employee relationship, and it also contains the terms and conditions of the employment. So this type of like in this type of contract, one person would be agreeing to employ another as an employer, while the other person would be agreeing to serve the employer as an employee. So this type of contracts are governed by labor legislations, and that means obligations on part of the employer is quite high. And the next type of employment contracts, that is contract for service. A contract for service is essentially an agreement between an organization and a self-employed person, and it contains the details regarding the project that person was tasked to complete, the time allocated for that project to be completed, the payment that is going to be made when the project is done. Those are the type of things that would be included in a contract for service. A contract for service establishes an employer-independent contract relationship between the contracting parties, and this type of contracts are governed by contract law, which means in return lower obligations on the employer, because the effects of labor legislations on this type of contracts are minimal. So the employers tend to prefer this type of contracts more. So more often than not, you can see employers adding a clause to the letter of appointment stating that this is a contract for service, or it could contain a clause like the relationship you have with the company will not construe a relationship between a employer and an employee. So you can see how it is unfair to decide an individual to be an employee or an independent contractor just because it is stated so in the letter of appointment or the employment contract. You need to study the facts of each and every case differently to really identify whether this individual is really an employee or really an independent contractor. So like this is not an easy task, but to make this process easier, the English courts came up with various tests, and Sri Lankan courts also follows these. So there's four tests we are going to study today. Those are the control test, integration test, economic reality test, and multiple test. So in a control test, what we look into is the ability and the extent to which the company is able to control or influence an individual's behavior. And there's four elements to this test. Like when you're applying this test to a case, you need to look for three elements in the facts of the case. If you can identify these three elements in the facts of the case, that means by applying the control test, you can identify that individual to be an employee. So these three elements are: a person should be agreeing to a person should be offering his services in consideration of the wages or other remunerations he is being paid. And secondly, that person should be agreeing to subject himself to the master's control. And thirdly, other provisions of the employment contract should be consistent with the contract of service. If these three elements can be found in the facts of the case, you can decide that the individual in question is an employee. Now, if we take an example, let's take a lady called Naina. So Naina is working at an at ABC Textiles. So she's required to be at the factory by 8 a.m. every day, and she's supposed to work there until 4 p.m. She's allowed only 1 hour of break, and that is for lunch. And um, she's required to wear the company provided uniform during the working hours. So those are the instances or the examples or the situations, like as in like like if you see in a case or a question, clues like that a person is like she has her working hours dictated to her. She should be working, like she should be wearing the company uniform during the working hours. Those type of things should clue you into the control the company is exerting over an individual. So in Naina's case, she's been controlled by the company to an extent, and by applying the control test, you can identify her to be an employee. So but this test proved to be insufficient when the individual in question was highly skilled and experienced in his area of work. So as an example, if you take an example, you don't see the chairman of a private hospital going to a doctor and say, like a doctor that is working there, and saying, oh my god, this is not the way you should be treating this patient, this is the way you should be treating this patient, you are using the wrong meds and all. That is because the doctor is more qualified and experienced when it comes to treating patients. He is specifically educated, like he went through, I don't know how many years of education through medical school to be a doctor. So obviously he is more qualified to treat a patient and to decide on the methods to treat a patient than the chairman of the hospital. But just because he is not being instructed on how to do his work does not mean that he's not an employee of that hospital. So so in integration test, what you do is you look into the degree of involvement of an individual in the organization. So what you do when you're applying this test, if you can see that the services offered by a particular individual is integral and part and parcel of the organization, then you can decide that that individual is an employee of the company or the organization. But if the services provided by this individual can be recognized as a part of a separate business owned by that individual or mere accessory to the organization, if it's so, you can decide like the test would indicate him to be an independent contractor. So in the previous situation of the doctor, it is an hospital. Yes, in an hospital, what you do is you treat patients. To treat patients, how can you treat patients without doctors? So that means the doctor is an integral part of the hospital. So that means he is an employee. You can identify him to be an employee by applying the integration test. Okay, so that's two tests we discussed so far. The third test we are going to talk about is the economic reality test. So in the economic reality test, what you do is you look into the economic practices of individuals. So if you can identify a certain individual to not bear the financial risk or the opportunity to profit from the contract he has in place, that means he is an employee. But if that individual is bearing the risk of loss and like the sole financial responsibility for the contract in place, then that means he is an independent contractor. Now let's take an example. So let's say there's a bookshop that sells all type of books, pens, pencils, novels, everything. And in a small corner of this bookshop, there's this small rack displaying handmade dolls, cards, and stuff like that. So there's a girl named Sunita who supply these handmade stuff once a month to the bookshop. She's the one who buy in all her materials. She's the one who decides on the the design of the dolls. um, so let's say she buys the materials need, like she's the one who owns all the instruments that needs to be needs in order to make these handmade dolls. I'm sorry, handmade dolls. So let's say in so in 1 month she buys all the materials and instruments needed to make these dolls, and she falls ill, and she was not able to supply the dolls in that particular month to the bookshop. So that means she's not getting paid for that month, because she did not supply any dolls in that month, and she has already spent money on the materials. So in that month she has no income, and she is left with the materials only, because she did not make because she did not make the dolls. So that means in that scenario, she is the one who bears the financial risk of that contract. So that means she is an independent contractor, not an employee of the bookshop. Yes. Okay. So the last test we need to discuss about is the multiple test. In a multiple test, like it is a fourfold test, and it looks in, when you're applying the multiple test, you will be looking into the facts of the case on 4 levels, and those 4 levels are control, ownership of tools, risk of loss, and chance of profit. So you can see like these 4 levels, like it sounds familiar. Yes, like you can see how this test has combined some of the aspects of the previously discussed tests. Now there's control, ownership of tools, risk of loss, and chance to profit. So let's take an example again. Let's take Naina, the one who works at the ABC Textiles. Okay, she was being controlled. Yes, like when we discussed it earlier, that example earlier, she was being controlled. You can see how the company controlled her. Yes, she was required to wear the company uniform during the working hours. She had her working hours dictated to her. She was only allowed 1 hour of break time, etc. So she was being controlled by the company. So there's no doubt about that. And the ownership of tools. So the sewing machine she is working on during the working hours, is it hers? No, it's provided and owned by the company. Does she bear any financial risk regarding does she bear the financial risk of the contract in place with the company? No, because now let's say the company, the BC Textiles, suffers a loss in sales in 1 month, but it does not mean that her salary will be deducted just because the company suffered a loss in that month. And the same goes when the company has a profit in sales in a particular month. Like the salary that's been paid to Nayana would be the same despite the profit or the loss suffered by the company. So if you apply again multiple tests to Nayana's scenario, you will be able to identify her to be an employee of ABC Textiles. Okay, so those are the 4 tests we are supposed to learn. But like I think if you are more interested in this area, like these are not the only tests that is available to identify a workman. There are tests like mutual obligation test, dominant impression tests. You can read up on these on those if you are interested. And of course there's case laws for this lesson also, so it's important that you read up on those too. So those relevant case laws for this lesson are Ready Mixed Concrete Private Limited versus Ministry of Pensions, Stevenson Jordan Harrison Limited versus McDonald and Evans, Market Investigations Limited versus Ministry of Social Security, Reverend Father Alexis Benedict of Youth Fisheries Training Project versus Denzil Pereira, Instant Marketing Private Limited versus Ranavira, and Selinco Insurance Company Limited versus Commissioner of Labor. Like, it is important that you read up on these case laws also. Mm, so let's quickly discuss one case law. Um, let's talk about the Reverend Father Alexis Benedict of Youth Fisheries Training Project versus Denzil Pereira. So in this case, there was this project, a youth fisheries training project. So in this project, there were applicants, young men. They applied to this project and they were trained in deep sea fishing. They were required to work in fishing boats after the training hours, and 50 equal shares of the 50% of the catch was paid as a salary to them, to the young men that was being trained in this project, and the other 50% was used to pay for the expenses of the project. And these young men were provided with hostels, and an EPF scheme and an insurance scheme was in place. And then suddenly the project dismissed these young men, and that's when and then the project claimed them to be independent contractor and like not employed. So the question was that. So what the courts did was they looked into the facts of the case. Now let's see. They were being paid a fixed amount. Like, it may be varied according to the catch of that particular day or the month, but the share of the catch that was being paid to these men were constant. So that is one, and they were being paid an EPF, and they were insured, and they were provided with hostels. And also it is important to note that all the equipments, the boards and the nets and all that, they were owned by the project, not by the individuals that was being trained in this project. So getting these facts into consideration, the court applied the relevant tests, that is the control test, integration test, and the economic reality test. The court decided these young men to be employees of that project, not independent contractors. So yes, this is. I hope this helps. This is a relatively easy lesson. So, and the plus side is this area is frequently tested in examinations. So yes, I hope this helps. See you in the next video.